Kia ora. Welcome to Campfire Stories. I'm Rose from Christchurch City Libraries, and I'm reading Agatha Christie's The Moving Finger. So far we've met quite a few characters, Jerry and Joanna, who have moved to a little provincial village. Jerry's recovering from a plane crash in World War II, and they received an anonymous letter in the mail. And it turns out that a lot of people in the village are getting these anonymous letters too, all really nasty. So far we've been introduced to quite a few different characters. And where we're catching up with at the moment is Jerry and Joanna had morning tea with Mr. Pye, and he has just had a letter delivered through his door. "Afternoon post," murmured Mr. Pye as he picked it up. "Now, my dear young people, you will come again, won't you? Such a pleasure to meet some broader minds, if you understand me. Someone with an appreciation of art. Really, you know, these dear good people down here, if you mention the ballet, it conveys to them pirouetting toes and tulle skirts and old gentlemen with opera glasses in the naughty 90s. It does indeed. 50 years behind the times, that's what I put them down as. A wonderful country, England. It has pockets. Lymstock is one of them. Interesting from a collector's point of view. I always feel I have voluntarily put myself under a glass shade when I am here. The peaceful backwater where nothing ever happens." Shaking hands with us twice over, he helped me with exaggerated care into the car. Joanna took the wheel. She negotiated with some care the circular sweep around a plot of unblemished grass. Then, with a straight drive ahead, she raised a hand to wave goodbye to our host where he stood on the steps of the house. I leaned forward to do the same. But our gesture of farewell went unheeded. Mr. Pye had opened his mail. He was standing staring down at the open sheet in his hand. Joanna had described him once as a plump pink cherub. He was still plump, but he was not looking like a cherub now. His face was a dark, congested purple, contorted with rage and surprise. And at that moment, I realised that there had been something familiar about the look of that envelope. I hadn't realised it at the time. Indeed, it had been one of those things that you note unconsciously without knowing that you do note them. "Goodness," said Joanna, "what's bitten the poor pet?" "I rather fancy," I said, "that it's the hidden hand again." She turned an astonished face towards me and the car swerved. "Careful, wench," I said. Joanna refixed her attention on the road. She was frowning. "You mean a letter like the one you got?" "It's my guess." "What is this place?" asked Joanna. "It looks the most innocent, sleepy, harmless little bit of England you can imagine." "Where to quote Mr. Pye, nothing ever happens," I cut in. "He chose the wrong minute to say that. Something has happened." "But who writes these things, Jerry?" I shrugged my shoulders. "My dear girl, how should I know? Some local nitwit with a screw loose, I suppose." "But why? It seems so idiotic." "You must read Freud and Jung and that lot to find out, or ask our Dr. Owen." Joanna tossed her head. "Dr. Owen doesn't like me. He's hardly seen you. He's seen quite enough, apparently, to make him cross over if he sees me coming along the high street." "A most unusual reaction," I said sympathetically, "and one you're not used to." Joanna was frowning again. "No, but seriously, Jerry, why do people write anonymous letters?" "As I say, they've got a screw loose. It satisfies some urge, I suppose. If you've been snubbed or ignored or frustrated and your life's pretty drab and empty, I suppose you get a sense of power from stabbing in the dark at people who are happy and enjoying themselves." Joanna shivered. "Oh, not nice." "No, not nice. I should imagine the people in these country places tend to be inbred. Somebody, I suppose, quite uneducated and inarticulate, with better education." Joanna did not finish her sentence, and I said nothing. I have never been able to accept the easy belief that education is a panacea for every ill. As we drove through the town before climbing up the hill road, I looked curiously at the few figures abroad in the high street. Was one of those sturdy countrywomen going about with a load of spite and malice behind her placid brow, planning perhaps even now a further outpouring of vindictive spleen? But I still did not take the thing seriously. 2 days later, we went to a bridge party at the Symingtons. It was a Saturday afternoon. The Symingtons always had their bridge parties on a Saturday because the office was shut then. There were 2 tables. The players were the Symingtons, ourselves, Miss Griffith, Mr. Pye, Miss Barton, and a Colonel Appleton, whom we had not yet met and who lived at Comaker, a village some 7 miles distant. He was a perfect specimen of the blimp type, about 60 years of age, liked playing what he called a plucky game, which usually resulted in immense sums above the line being scored by his opponents, and was so intrigued by Joanna that he practically never took his eyes off her the whole afternoon. I was forced to admit that my sister was probably the most attractive thing that had been seen in Lymstock for many a long day. When we arrived, Elsie Holland, the children's governess, was hunting for some extra bridge scorers in an ornate writing desk. She glided across the floor with them in the same celestial way I had first noticed, but the spell could not be cast a second time. Exasperating that it should be so, a waste of a perfect lovely form and face. But I noticed now only too clearly the exceptionally large white teeth like tombstones and the way she showed her gums when she laughed. She was, unfortunately, one of your prattling girls. Are these the ones, Mrs. Symington? It's ever so stupid of me not to remember where we put them away last time. It's my fault too, I'm afraid. I had them in my hand, and then Brian called out his engine had not caught, and I ran out, and what with one thing and another, I must have just stuffed them in there somewhere stupid. These aren't the right ones I see now. They're a bit yellow at the edges. Shall I tell Agnes tea at 5? I'm taking the kiddies to Longbarrow, so there won't be any noise. A nice, kind, bright girl. I caught Joanna's eye. She was laughing. I stared at her coldly. Joanna always knows what is passing in my mind, curse her. We settled down to bridge. I was soon to know, to a nicety, the bridge status of everyone in Lymstock. Mrs. Symington was an exceedingly good bridge player and was quite a devotee of the game. Like many definitely unintellectual women, she was not stupid and had a considerable natural shrewdness. Her husband was a good sound player, slightly overcautious. Mr. Pye can best be described as brilliant. He had an uncanny flair for psychic bidding. Joanna and I, since the party was in our honour, played at a table with Mrs. Symington and Mr. Pye. It was Symington's task to pour oil on troubled waters, and by the exercise of tact to reconcile the 3 other players at his table. Colonel Appleton, as I have said, was wont to play a plucky game. Little Miss Barton was without exception the worst bridge player I have ever come across, and always enjoyed herself enormously. She did manage to follow suit, but had the wildest ideas as to the strength of her hand, never knew the score, repeatedly let out the wrong hand, and was quite unable to count trumps and often forgot what they were. Amy Griffith's play can be summed up in her own words. I like a good game of bridge with no nonsense, and I don't play any of these rubbishy conventions. I say what I mean, and no post-mortems. After all, it's only a game. It will be seen, therefore, that their host had not too easy a task. Play proceeded fairly harmoniously, however, with occasional forgetfulness on the part of Colonel Appleton as he stared across at Joanna. Tea was laid in the dining room, round a big table. As we were finishing, 2 hot and excited little boys rushed in and were introduced, Mrs. Symington beaming with maternal pride, as was their father. Then, just as we were finishing, a shadow darkened my plate, and I turned my head to see Megan standing in the French window. "Oh," said her mother, "here's Megan." Her voice held a faintly surprised note, as though she had forgotten that Megan existed. The girl came in and shook hands, awkwardly and without any grace. "I'm afraid I forgot about your tea, dear," said Mrs. Symington. Miss Holland and the boys took theirs out with them, so there's no nursery tea today. I forgot you weren't with them." Megan nodded. "That's all right. I'll go to the kitchen." She slouched out of the room. She was untidily dressed as usual, and there were potatoes in both heels. Mrs. Symington said with a little apologetic laugh, "My poor Megan. She's just at that awkward age, you know. Girls are always shy and awkward when they've just left school, before they've properly grown up." I saw Joanna's fair hair jerk backwards in what I knew to be a warlike gesture. "But Megan's 20, isn't she?" she said. "Oh, yes, she is. But of course she's very young for her age, quite a child still. It's so nice, I think, when girls don't grow up too quickly." She laughed again. "I expect all mothers want their children to remain babies." "I can't think why," said Joanna. "After all, it would be a bit awkward if one had a child who remained mentally 6 while his body grew up." "Oh, you mustn't take things so literally, Miss Burton," said Mrs. Symington. It occurred to me at that moment that I did not much care for Mrs. Symington. That anemic, slighted, faded prettiness concealed, I thought, a selfish and grasping nature. She said, and I disliked her a little more still, "My poor Megan. She's a rather difficult child, I'm afraid. I've been trying to find her something to do. I believe there are several things one can learn by correspondence, designing and dressmaking, or she might try and learn shorthand and typing." The red glint was still in Joanna's eye. She said as we sat down again at the bridge table, "I suppose she'll be going to parties and all that sort of thing. Are you going to give a dance for her?" "A dance?" Mrs. Symington seemed surprised and amused. "Oh, no, we don't do things like that down here." "I see, just tennis parties and things like that." "Our tennis court has not been played on for years. Neither Richard nor I play, I suppose later when the boys grow up. Oh, Megan will find plenty to do. She's quite happy just pottering about, you know. Let me see, did I deal? No, 2 no trumps." As we drove home, Joanna said with a vicious pressure on the accelerator pedal that made the car leap forward, "I feel awfully sorry for that girl." "Megan?" "Yes, her mother doesn't like her." "Oh, come no, Joanna, it's not as bad as that." "Yes, it is. Lots of mothers don't like their children. Megan, I should imagine, is an awkward sort of creature to have about the house. She disturbs the pattern, the Symington pattern. It's a complete unit without her, and that's a most unhappy feeling for a sensitive creature to have, and she is sensitive." "Yes," I said, "I think she is." I was silent for a moment. Joanna suddenly laughed mischievously. "Bad luck for you about the governess." "I don't know what you mean," I said with dignity. "Nonsense. Masculine chagrin was written on your face every time you looked at her." "I agree with you. It is a waste. I don't know what you're talking about. But I'm delighted all the same. It's the first sign of reviving life. I was quite worried about you at the nursing home. You never even looked at that remarkably pretty nurse you had. An attractive minx too. Absolutely God's gift to a sick man." "Your conversation, Joanna, I find definitely low." My sister continued to pay the least attention to my remarks. "So I was a bit relieved to see you'd still got an eye for a nice bit of skirt. She is a looker. Funny that the SA should have been left out completely. It is odd, you know, Jerry. What is the thing that makes some women have and others haven't? What is it makes one woman, even if she only says foul weather, so attractive that every man within range wants to come over and talk about the weather with her? I suppose Providence makes a mistake every now and then when sending out the parcel. One Aphrodite face and form, one temperament ditto. And something goes astray, and the Aphrodite temperament goes to some little plain-faced creature, and then all the other women go simply mad and say, I can't see what the men see in her. She isn't even good looking. Have you quite finished, Joanna? Well, you do agree, don't you? I grinned. I'll admit to disappointment. And I don't see who else there is here for you. You'll have to fall back upon Amy Griffith. God forbid, I said. She's quite good looking, you know. Too much of an Amazon for me. She seems to enjoy her life all right, said Joanna. Absolutely disgustingly hearty, isn't she? I shouldn't be at all surprised if she had a cold bath every morning. And what are you going to do for yourself? I asked. Me? Yes, you'll need a little distraction down here if I know you. Who's being low now? Besides, you forget Paul. Joanna heaved up a not very, convincing sigh. I shan't forget him nearly as quickly as you will. In about 10 days you'll be saying, Paul? Paul who? I never knew a Paul. You think I'm completely fickle, said Joanna. When people like Paul are in question, I'm only too glad that you should be. You never did like him, but he really was a bit of a genius. Possibly, though I doubt it. Anyway, from all I've heard, geniuses are people to be heartily disliked. One thing, you won't find any geniuses down here. Joanna considered for a moment, her head on one side. I'm afraid not, she said regretfully. You'll have to fall back upon Owen Griffith, I said. He's the only unattached male in the place, unless you count old Colonel Appleton. He was looking at you like a hungry bloodhound most of the afternoon. Joanna laughed. He was, wasn't he? It was quite embarrassing. Don't pretend, you're never embarrassed. Joanna drove in silence through the gate and round to the garage. She said then, There may be something in that idea of yours. What idea? Joanna replied, I don't see why any man should deliberately cross the road to avoid me. It's rude, apart from anything else. I see, I said. You're going to hunt the man down in cold blood. Well, I don't like being avoided. I got slowly and carefully out of the car and balanced my sticks. Then I offered my sister a piece of advice. Let me tell you this, my girl. Owen Griffith isn't any of your tame, whining, artistic young men. Unless you're careful, you'll stir up a hornet's nest about your ears. That man could be dangerous. Oh, do you think so? Demanded Joanna with every symptom of pleasure at the prospect. Leave the poor devil alone, I said sternly. How dare he cross the street when he saw me coming? All you women are alike. You harp on one theme. You'll have Sister Amy gunning for you too, if I'm not mistaken. She dislikes me already, said Joanna. She spoke meditatively, but with a certain satisfaction. We have come down here, I said sternly, for peace and quiet, and I mean to see we get it. But peace and quiet were the last things we were to have. So things are hotting up in Lymstock Village. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.